This is Tracy Allen, editor of the Kansas City Call newspaper. Thank you for joining with me today. I have a special guest with us here on the Kansas City Business Association, Arielle Nash. Many of you probably have heard of that last name. Her father, Troy Nash, used to be on the city council for the city of Kansas City, Missouri, as far as the 3rd District. Arielle, welcome. Thank you for joining with me today and so forth.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. You've been a busy young lady. You've been doing a lot from the time that you graduated from high school and so forth. But what I want to talk a little bit to our listeners and viewers today is a little bit about some of the things you've been doing as a young adult from the time, like I said, you graduated from high school. But one of the things is I know a lot of our listeners and our audience may not know, you grew up in the 3rd District of Kansas City. I know basically around the Norton area. Tell us a little bit about just your journey from the time that you were young. With your dad being a city council person, I know he had an influence on you in a lot of ways.
Yes, that's a really good question. Let me take a second to think about it. Well, I was born and raised in Kansas City on the east side, like you said. Since he was a city councilman, he had to live in district. So we did live at 1820 Norton, and I really enjoyed living there. It was a really beautiful neighborhood. I had, my neighborhood best friend. So that was a really good experience for me. And I started Pembroke Hill when I was about 3 years old. So I was there from 3 until I graduated, which is considered a lifer. Also, when I was growing up, I would say I didn't have necessarily a typical childhood. I wasn't always, after school going to play with the other kids. I was actually attending meetings with my dad. He actually served on an international board of directors, and this gave me the opportunity to travel excessively throughout Europe, across the United States, and even went to places like Australia, Taiwan. And that's what sort of gave me a global perspective and made me realize, it's not just me in this world. It's not just America. There are so many other different types of people.
How old were you when you started getting, because I believe it was People to People International that he was probably a part of.
Yes.
How old were you when you started getting some interest? Because you said you were not the normal, typical kid.
Right.
What do you mean by that?
So I started going to those meetings. They would have a worldwide conference every single year when I was 7 or 8 years old. So it was when I was pretty young. And I say that because not having a normal childhood, because, a lot of people, they are playing after school, but my dad definitely wanted me to have that exposure, going to meetings and being exposed to the business world and what, the real workforce is like. But more importantly, entrepreneurship. He was always trying to give me that entrepreneurship seed that he had, that hunger in him. So I'm really glad that he passed that down to me. And he would tell me things like, you don't need to work a normal job because you can be your own boss. And I'm eternally grateful for that advice, because I don't want to follow the crowd. I never have followed the crowd. So I think that was the best advice he could have given me at the time. And that kind of led us to start thinking about what ways can we help the community, given all that he has done, and then the things that I want to do. So then that's when we began our business, the Nash Group Development, in 2013. So I was actually in 2013, I was 13 at the time.
Ariel, you mentioned about the fact being 13 years old when you and your dad started Nash Development. When you mentioned about the fact you said you didn't have a normal childhood, growing up in the 3rd District, how did you did you receive taunts? Did you see kids that saying, why are you doing that? And especially with your dad. And how did you handle all of that?
I didn't really receive, I feel like, that much backlash for it. I mean, people would ask me when I was going to Pembroke, why are you doing all these sorts of things with your dad? And to me at the time, it was just normal. That's my normal way of life. It was going, finishing school and then going to work with him at Zimmer at the time. And we would work on, real estate related projects. And that's kind of sparked my initial interest. So I was willing to do that. And I wanted to do that because I wanted to absorb that information. And I'm really glad that I did, because it's helped me, to this day, to get to the point where I am.
Where are you at right now as far as, one of the things is you and your dad have a real estate business, I believe,
Right.
where you guys are dealing specifically with affordable housing projects for both people, both in the Kansas City, I know also St. Louis area. Tell me, what drew you guys to want to specifically focus on that, and then how that has propelled you from the standpoint. I know right now you're doing, I believe, an internship with Artemis Real Estate in Washington, D.C., correct?
Yes, I just finished that yesterday, actually. I just got back in Kansas City last night.
Yeah.
So that was a really awesome opportunity as well.
But talk
Go
a
on.
little bit about the fact of your dad and you, as far as starting particularly this business, but focusing a lot on affordable housing here in Kansas.
Right.
What have you learned about that and so forth?
Well, I would probably start off by saying my dad took me to the neighborhoods where he grew up in, and they weren't nice neighborhoods. He grew up in public housing. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Holy Temple and Friendship Village. Some of these they actually had to tear down. When I saw the dilapidated conditions that he grew up in, and then the way that he was trying to raise me, it just made me really realize that there are still people in these situations. So that's kind of what geared us towards affordable housing, because we want to be able to provide people with clean, safe living that don't necessarily, come from good socioeconomic backgrounds, that are underserved and underprivileged, because the core of the Nash Group is to help people. And that's what we do with our affordable housing projects, because we're not just throwing up something, quickly for somebody to live in. We want them to feel nice, because I'm a firm believer in your environment has so much to do. It's directly correlated with your productivity. So that's why we build developments that are aesthetically pleasing to the eye, that even I would live in. Because I think that's so important. And that's what drew me to it, because I want to uplift the community, especially where I grew up. And I grew up on the east side in the 3rd district. And that's why we have projects over there, because I want to uplift the community. And by building, these really nice developments, it actually helps the economic growth within the area. It'll bring more jobs, more people that want to live there, more employers, bigger tenant corporations. It'll really uplift the entire community. And that's my personal goal with the Nash Group, is to help those that are underserved and, don't come from the best backgrounds, because where you live can be a catalyst, and help you realize that, life doesn't have to be that way.
Can you talk a little bit about maybe 1 or 2 projects, maybe here in Kansas City, but I also know you talk about you guys doing the same thing in St. Louis, and where you guys are on some of those.
So currently we have, I want to say 2 to 3 projects. We're working with the KCATA. They're actually called transit-oriented developments. So they're close to a transit area. So those that don't have access to a car can easily take the train and be right back at home. So those ones on the east side, I'm really excited about, because as you know, development in the east side is hard to achieve. But something that's different about the Nash Group is, when we go into a community, we're not trying to tell them how to run their community, because the people that live there obviously know their needs the best. So we like to go in, talk to the key stakeholders, get all of that information from the community, so that we can build something that best fits their needs.
And then what about as far as the St. Louis, Missouri area?
So in St. Louis, that one's also really exciting. It's probably one of my favorite projects. We're actually partnered with an FQHC. So a healthcare center out there. It's called Care STL Health. They have an amazing CEO, Angela Claiborne. We work very closely with her. So working with the healthcare facility to build what we call Alumnus Gardens 1. There's actually some other phases in the pipeline as well, but number 1 is obviously the first. And since it's partnered with the healthcare facility, there's also healthcare attributes to it. So people will have access to the facility, and then also have access to this new development. And that one's actually under construction right now. I just got a building report this past week, and everything's going great. So I'm really excited to see that one continue to build, and then eventually help the people in that St. Louis area. That's really rough, actually.
All right. Are you guys basically just going to focus specifically on the Midwest, like Kansas City and St. Louis? Have you thinking about other areas of the country?
For sure. We actually are expanding very quickly, considering, how long we've really been doing this for. We have potential projects in Florida, some other ones in Utah. So no, our scope is wide, and my hope for the Nash Group is to eventually take it global as well, because I do speak Spanish and Chinese, and I kind of want to marry those two into this development and see how I can take affordable housing to other places, not necessarily affordable, maybe down the road market rate as well.
Mhm. I'll jump back to the different languages that you speak. But one of the things you mentioned about doing an internship, and
Yes.
specifically with Artemis Real Estate, tell me
Yes.
a little bit and tell our audience a little bit more about how you got connected with that, some of the things that you have learned from that as you and your dad, Troy, kind of infiltrate some of those things that you learned into the Nash Group.
Right. So I had the opportunity to intern through SEO, and I was actually fortunate enough to meet the he sits on the
So
board.
just this is to stop you a little bit. What's SEO so our listeners know what that is and so forth?
Seizing every opportunity. It's a really great program, and I was introduced by the global head of strategic. I'm trying to get his title right. He was the first partner at Blackstone, and he heads the global strategic partnerships sector. So I met him last year when my father and I were featured in the Savoy magazine, and we saw him sitting in the back of the room. So I go up to him. His name's Verdon Perry, and we have a couple of conversations, meet later at the reception, exchange contact information. And from there, we start having Zoom calls. And he tells me about SEO and that he only recommends 2 people each year, because he sits on the board of SEO, to go and participate in an internship in DC. So a year later, I actually ended up going to DC, and I just, like I said, finished today. It was a month-long experience, and the first week was really intense, all called Wall Street Prep. So that's where you learn the financial modeling in Excel and how to do all of that good stuff. And then the next 2 weeks we're touring different property types, different asset classes to get a feel, which one might best suit us, which one we might like the most, and what field we might like to go in, because within finance there's a lot of different sectors. There's wealth management, there's investor relations, there's the financial modeling side, there's raising of the capital. So we would just hear from people that do each of those different things. And it was an amazing and an extraordinary opportunity. I learned so much about every single asset class, from hotels, how hard those are to operate. People don't realize how many different parts actually go into hotel management and acquiring an asset like that, to looking at the financial models, assessing a deal, and making sure that it would be, financially feasible for Artemis, let's say, to purchase. And then our last project that I actually had to do yesterday morning was a case study. And for that, my project, we had a mixed unit multifamily development. So it was a little bit easier for me because I was used to doing this type of work, because we already do the mixed use multi developments. So that was really fun. We actually presented in front of an investment committee. Everybody was from Artemis, and that went really well yesterday. So we just learned so much in how to present ourselves and go back and dig deep into those financial models, which I think is such an important, skill set to have, because being on the development side of things, I see the whole pre-development phase, but there's obviously no deal if there's no financials to back it. So that's why I really wanted to get into the financial aspect of it, to see, how to source funds, how could we raise capital, and things like that.
When you look at that month long, what are some things you mentioned about how to deal with getting the sources, the funding, the capital, and so forth? Are those some of the things that you're hoping to be able to include, now that you've gone through that? And that's the first question. And then the second question, you had the opportunity to meet Vernon Perry. What were some of the things that you learned from him, from the things that he has done through the decades, really?
Right. So to answer the first part, wait, can you say the first part of your question again? I'm like thinking so fast.
The first question is simply, what are some of the things that you would like to bring from that month-long internship that you think you could bring into, the Nash group?
Right. So like I said, the financial aspect of it all, I think that just having that know-how and that knowledge of how money works, how debt works, how you can use different, financial devices to make a deal happen, that's what I want to use and take to the Nash group, because I think that that information is invaluable.
Mhm.
And Mr. Perry, he was just so nice to talk to. He would give me, I feel like he's my mentor at this point, and he would just give me so
Program is brought to you by the Kansas City Business Association.